we undertook this study to say why they don't, to understand those who are affected by the same conditions that lead people to fighting, but they don't fight. What do they do? What is it that helps them or enables them to deal with those conditions? We know, and I'm a student of conflict at Masters and PhD, and that is the area I specialized in, that exclusion, injustice, and discrimination are the key underlying drivers for violence and conflict. And if there are ways that people respond to that, those explain all the civil wars and even what is happening in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever. Underneath, you'll find those three explaining the mobilization, the organization, and the fighting. And we tried to understand what else do other people do, because according to research, much as there is a lot of violence, it is only less than 5% of the population that actually participate in violence. The majority of them don't. And that is worldwide. If all the 40 million Ugandans were to go to war every time we have had civil wars or regime change, you will find nobody in Uganda. It is only 5% that participate in violence. And the question is, what do the others do to cope, to withstand, to engage? Our study tried to examine, is there anything that we can learn from that at a policy level? So we undertook a study to understand those who are affected by those conditions, but they don't fight. What do they do? How do they cope? What explains their non-participation in violence? And is there anything that we can take away? And if we do, what does it mean for the academia? What does it mean for police? What does it mean for religious organizations? What does it mean for cultural leaders? And so on and so forth. That is the niche. We focused on the youth. And over the last few years, 2 years, we have been looking at different groups of people. Some of you in the room have participated in our initial consultations and workshops to talk about this and to find responses to critical answers at different stages, and to come up with an explanation of why they don't fight, and so what if they don't. One thing I want to dispel or to discourage or to take out of the room is the word fear. Normally the immediate explanation is they don't fight because they are afraid. Okay? There are people demonstrating on the streets in Kampala against Kampala City Council brutality and taxes and the law enforcement officers. But there will be 2-3 people who will stay on the street selling their chewing gum and music. You get what I mean? And then you will ask, but why aren't they joining? And say, these ones are cowards. That is the traditional explanation. Our research has proved that it's not wrong. I mean, it is absolutely wrong. That even fear is rationalized. And that people who do not participate are very rational actors. They weigh their options, they construct pathways that they protect very jealously, to the extent that they are ready to abandon their peers and influencers and leaders to protect those pathways towards what? Towards what? So, we're going to answer that. So, you know, I will not take you back into the conditions that explain injustice, discrimination, and exclusion. All of you in the room are able to provide examples, whether it is unemployment, whether it is corruption, whether it is tribalism and nepotism, whether it is poverty, poor access to services, and so on and so forth. You know, all these are factors that combine to influence the thinking that have been excluded. This is injustice, land evictions, and so on. I was asking somebody in the security sector that for the last 5-10 years, we have been seeing land evictions every day. Some of them are on the media, others are not reported. And I asked him, where do you think the people who are evicted go? Where do they go? What happens to them? Does anybody know what they are planning? What alternative means of livelihood do they adapt? Do they just stay away? So, everything that explains injustice, exclusion, is out there in the open. Our goal was to find those who do not participate in violence. We took different groups. We have interacted with former gang members. We have interacted with self-identified non-participants in violence. And we use the word self-identified deliberately because these are individuals that through purposive sampling, purposively, you know, being directed, go and meet so and so. These are people who explained, gave us stories of where there were all conditions to participate in violence and they decided not to participate. Somebody is mobilized, the whole gang is mobilized to go and participate and disrupt a political rally in Wachiso. They are on the way, they have been given money, 20,000 each one, and then the person says, takes a different route and say, I have the money, all my colleagues, the transport is there, but I will not go. You get what I mean? That is self-identified. Another person says, we are going for an attack, we are going to join the Kayunga riots, you know, we are heading towards Kayunga in many buses, but he sneaks out of the vehicle. But the vans are there, about 4, they have the machetes hidden and knives, and they are going to Kayunga for what? The vehicle stops on the way and he disappears in the bush. That is a self, you get what I mean? You ask that individual, what happened at that moment? What influenced you? You know? So, we engaged into self-identified participants in non-violence. We looked at self-identified participants, those who participated, and the guy says, yes, I did. You know, we invited some of them in workshops where the police was present. Claire, remember at Africana? There are people who refused to come at the beginning. Why? Because they knew that they were members of the police. Cafe was there and others. And so they first sent their agents to come and see who else is at Africana. Then when they discovered that things are okay, after lunch they started appearing, you know, with dreadlocks, and they sat politely in the room. By the end of the day, they were standing up and telling the police, but you arrested me, and you know, so and so on. My brother there can tell some of those stories, you know, at African. So, we have created this environment, and this is how we have come up with some of the issues. Now, to jump that story, to come up with so what, we came to identify 4 critical things that play out in non-participation in violence. Resilience, social bonds, relationships are the 3 key drivers that people, non-participants in violence, depict or reflect or are characterized by. That the levels of resilience that they carry around themselves, the social bonds that produce levels of commitment to the other or to a community, and the relationships they carry that define their everyday networks and interaction are very important in influencing non-participation. But all these three combine towards the overarching objective, towards the overarching goal of self-advancement. And the word self-advancement appeared to be very important amongst non-participants in violence. There was a strong emphasis on that, but self-advancement was always explained at a very individual and family level. There was now reference to, we want to protect Uganda and make sure Uganda is peaceful. No. That is consistent with research that was conducted by Afrobarometer in 1991, when they questioned Ugandans how their preference, and many, over 98, and that was a huge sample. It was in hundreds of thousands of respondents, online and individual interviews, and over 90% said they prefer to be refer to themselves by their tribes than being called Ugandans. You know, I'm like that, but not Ugandan. The sense of nationhood has not sunk down. So non-participation in violence is motivated largely by the pursuit of self-advancement. And in the process, those who do not participate are guided by resilience, relationships, and social bonds that are very strong. Now, resilience is both a process but also an outcome. People think that being resilient is you resist incitement. You experience hardship and you are able to bounce back and remain who you are. But according to our research, resilience is towards a purpose. People are not resilient for the sake of being resilient. And we have seen this shortcoming in so many resilient training programs, that people are trained how to withstand, but towards a goal. People who just there to persist and to stay calm and to avoid or to deflect problems, they tend to burn out. In the process, they can become dormant and non-productive. Non-participants in violence, we discovered that those people tend to pay strong attention to self-advancement, and they are therefore resilient towards that goal. Somebody will say, I did not participate. One gentleman told us when we were in marching day, he said, I have participated in every riot you can talk about. Muslim riots in the mosques, I was there. The Tabligh, he had this. I was in Chiseka market. I was, the guy was saying, I was caught and I knew all these networks. And then you ask him, but what then happened? He said, you see, I have children. Okay? That's number one. Number two, I discovered that if I focused on my business, he had a small business in Katwe, I could help my children better. So I started avoiding the meetings that people were invited to, and that is how he slowly bowed out. So he developed means and ways and alternative ways of resisting incitement and manipulation because he was focusing on a higher goal. It was not only because he got tired of violence, but because there was an alternative pathway to self-advancement, and that was his small business that was in that way. The social bonds that do exist are bonds that are constructed within society. Normally, these relate with family, they relate with the religious organization, they relate with culture. These are bonds that non-participants in violence hold as strong and true, that they work, and they value them. These bonds tend to replace the preference for violence because of the commitment the individual has developed. Religion is said to have uncontested influence on all of us, and culture is the same way. But people who are non-participants in violence tend to reflect strong social bonds that relate with either family or culture or religion and peer influences. These are very strong bonds that are driven by what we call pro-social values. Pro-social value systems and norms that bind the individual within a community, and the cost of disrupting that relationship is higher than the participation in violence. You get it. The cost of individual participation for you to go into a demonstration, and that's what the cost of that participating in violence is measured in terms of how it disrupts these social bonds. And an individual who has strong social bonds and pro-social values and so on is importantly known. Why? Because these pro-social values are known to influence self-regulation. An individual will measure and weigh the opportunity cost and regulate his interactions with either violent communities or non-violent communities and the actions that he takes. That is critical. Relationships, on the other hand, are also important. And the relationships in this case, we are not talking about relationships as in my brother and my sister and or my classmate. But the underlying critical and much as I had done that in some other forms of research I have done, but we discovered that relationships are critical, and relationships are used as an operational concept. It's not an analytical framework. Relationships are not just an experience, but they are guided by key elements. All relationships have interests, and non-participants in violence are always very clear about the interests that they prioritize. What my interest is. Number two, all relationships have a form of identity. There is a way non-participants identify themselves within society and within the social networks they build and within the forms of the forms of work and the means of work that they engage in. Now, you have an interest, you carry an identity, and all relationships contain a form of power. Non-participants in violence believe that even in the presence of exclusion, injustice, and discrimination, there is a level of power that an individual has to do something about the condition. Not only to allow it to suppress, but to find alternative means and pathways to solve the problem. They don't accept that because we have been denied political participation, that is the end. They create alternative means and ways. So the power the individual has to develop those alternative ways is a form of power. It's a form of power. There's no relationship without power. Even in a marriage, man and woman, they're in a marriage relationship. There are levels of power. There's power that comes into play. And even non-participants believe that they hold a level of power that can help them to constructively engage exclusion and discrimination and injustice, to find alternative pathways to solve the situation. And all relationships have perceptions. Non-participants in violence have positive perceptions of the conditions. They do. It's not that they don't in turn take the wrath and the adversity and the difficulties of exclusion and injustice. They do, but their perceptions are always to find, so what is the alternative? Okay? Dennis Sandole has said, conflicts are always about perceptions. It all begins by a perception. Once the perceptions are constructed, that he hates me, you get it, or he's against me. The moment that kicks in, everything else that follows is shaped by the perception that you carry. So relationships carry a form of perception within them. And if the relationships are positive, it means they are supportive perception, positive perceptions. If the relationships are negative, violent, then the perceptions are what? Negative. And lastly, relationships are guided by interaction. There has to be a pattern of interaction of some sort. Non-participants in violence maintain peer networks, social networks, forms of interaction that create alternative means for them to continue to live towards self-advancement. They always explore alternatives. Now, why am I explaining those three concepts in detail? Resilience, social bonds, and relationships, because they combine to influence an individual's pursuit of self-advancement. And we discovered that if those three exist, and that is what you have found, so what? We discovered that when you look at the existing policies that government has put out, whether it is the National Youth Policy, Women Empowerment Entrepreneurship Program, the Youth Livelihood Program, what else? The NADS, what others? There are so many other. These policies are reactions. Many of them are developed to react and to cool the situation down. They lack critical ingredients that would provide for a peaceful society that has positive relationships within them, that has strong social bonds within them, that builds resilience amongst beneficiaries of such policies and programs. The same applies with the education system, that the curriculum that we have lacks these elements within the forms of training. And yet, according to the rationale we carry in this study, we believe that the youth are a social and functional construct. It's a construction. And because it is a construct, it can be influenced positively or negatively. If you create the appropriate environment, okay, in which relationships are strong, in which social bonds function to fulfill the individual need for self-esteem and respect and moving forward, in which individuals are resilient, because resilience matters, because conditions of exclusion and injustice and discrimination will always be with us. But what do? Do you continue to fight and create bigger armies and create, transform the whole street into a pool of intelligence people and spies to always look out for the other? No, you create programs and mechanisms that prepare people to constructively engage those conditions when they arise.